Thanks for coming to the program, everybody. Without further ado, this is Debi Graham-Leard, our mystery author.
Right.
All right, yay. Well, I just tried to recruit the book club that's down the hall, but they're nonfiction.
Oh, okay.
One of them said, oh, I read mysteries too. I said, well, come down to the room when you're done and I'll give you a bookmark. Oh, you did come down. Hi, Anne.
Hello.
No, it wasn't Anne, it was another lady. You want to sit next to this gentleman?
Sure.
Only if she promises to misbehave.
For those of you who would not know this, Dick Noss was the director of a classic sound, women's barbershop chorus back in the day, and she was a baritone and a tenor, and I was a baritone.
And after you're all done, you'll sing and lead, and we'll say,
Oh. Okay, very good. All right, well, I am here today to talk to you about writing a series. My original talk was about how I came to write my very first mystery, which I didn't even begin until I retired in 2010. So since then, I have published 6. 5 of them are a mystery series, and there's 1 standalone. But because I'm talking about the series and not just the first book, I'll throw in a little bit of each of them to see if you're interested in the characters and the stories and all of that. One of the things I did in The Uninvited Guest was I brought Gwen Andrews' husband back as a ghost, and he does appear in all of the stories. I thought that was such fun. I wrote that based on Topper. Are any of you old enough to remember the show Topper? Very non-threatening ghosts. They would just show up and cause him all kinds of trouble. And I wrote Parker, who's the husband. I wrote him in that vein to be not scary. He's a nice guy. He was nice in life, and he's nice as a ghost. So that was an interesting facet of the Uninvited Guest. And I'll tell you a little bit about the Uninvited Guest. She was a woman who was hired to come down to Harbor Falls. And by the way, this is located in a version of Norton, Massachusetts, but I fictionalized it because I moved the library to the other side of the Norton Common, so it was no longer Norton. And I also moved the whole town to the coast of Massachusetts. So in Norton, when you take a right on Route 140, you go to Taunton. In Harbor Falls, you take a right on Harbor Hill, and you go down into the harbor and all the little shops, and it's just a delightful place to be. And whenever my husband and I drive through Norton, are any of you familiar with the Norton Library, the old Norton Library? Okay, well, Nancy, you would be. I always thought it would be the coolest place to live, so that is why I decided to have my character live there. I converted the whole thing. And I wasn't able to get a tour of it at the time. It is owned by Wheaton College. And there had been some vandalism and break-ins and safety issues, so they would not let me go inside until, when did we do that, Nancy? Was it May, June of this year? Somebody bought the building, and he's very slow on the conversion. I guess he's turning it into like office space. But Nancy and some of the other people in the Historic Commission said, Deb, would you like to go inside the library? I said, of course I would. So we all went through. And Gwen's version of the library is not quite the same as the actual library. I really gussied it up a lot. So after I wrote The Uninvited Guest, I really didn't know that I was at the beginning of a series. And my readers started saying, Debbie, where's the next book? What is Gwen doing? So I started coming up with other stories. So just to give you an idea, The Uninvited Guest, Gwen Andrews is my main character. She's my amateur sleuth. And she is suspected of doing away with her uninvited guest, who is a very nasty woman from Vermont who came down from Vermont to judge a music competition. Gwen is forced, blackmailed, to host this judge when she didn't even know who the judge was. And Henrietta is not a nice person. And I brought a couple of my how-to books to share with you as we go through. When I first started writing, I had no idea what I was doing. I joined the Cape Cod Writers Center. I've gone to retreats and workshops and seminars. It's just soaking up the craft of writing. And when I started doing the talk that I do, I counted up my how-to books. I started buying how-to books about everything. Anything you want to know how to do, there's a book. And I had 50 how-to books, just about writing. So I brought a few to share with you now and again. But this is one of my favorites. When I was writing this woman who came down to judge the competition, I named her Henrietta Wickham. And I just fell in love with the name. But she was a bad girl. But I needed to know how to write her. So I went out and I bought this how-to book. Bullies, bastards, and bitches. And none of the how-to books that you read can tell you how to write your particular story. They don't know the time frame, they don't know the location, the characters, they really don't know anything, but they can help you avoid the pitfalls. The biggest pitfall from this how-to book was that every bad girl has to have some good somewhere. There has to be a balance. So by the time you get to the end of The Uninvited Guest, you get an inkling of her upbringing and why she's so nasty to people. And it doesn't forgive how she treats people, but at least you have a little bit of an understanding. Yeah, exactly. So that always gets a laugh. And one of the most fun things to do when you're writing fiction is picking the names for your characters. Henrietta Wickham was one of my favorites, but I go to the Social Security files, U.S. Social Security, and the Census Bureau. And I'll figure out, well, who's the character and when was this person born? And I will ask for the top 100 names for girls and boys, babies. And I'll usually go down 25 to 50 names because I don't want them to be really common names. I want them to be unusual. And I keep track of all the names. I have a sheet in my how-to book. I didn't bring any of my notebooks, but one of the sections that deals with characters has a list, first name, last name, A to Z, because I try not to have the same first letter for any characters. You want different syllables, amount of syllables, you want different endings, because it's so confusing. I've listened to a lot of audiobooks when I'm driving around New England. My favorite thing to do, drive around with an audiobook to a library. But I've listened to several over the years, and their characters will have, like Brian and I forget what the other guy's, Bristol, whatever, and I would say, oh, which guy is that? One was an FBI agent and one was a policeman. It's, oh, which is he? It's too confusing, so I try to avoid that at all costs. One of my other favorite names was for the second story, which is Where There's Smoke, There's Trouble, a little take on Where There's Smoke, There's Fire. I was driving home one day from North Attleboro back to Norton, and I passed a street and it said Benjamin Lane, and the next street was Snowcrest Avenue. I said, Benjamin Snowcrest, what a great name. So he ended up being the white-haired detective in Where There's Smoke, There's Trouble. And he has recurred in the rest of these stories. I won't tell you why. But that story is that I gave Gwen my dislike of cigar smoke. And I built a whole story around it. And some of my readers have said, I don't like cigar smoke either, but I don't know if I'd go that far with it. And I try to get the covers. I usually provide the photograph for the cover. And I do like it to, oh, and I forgot to bring it in, I do like to have it connect to the story. So for this one, I went into a cigar shop over on Route 44 in Raynham, and they let me go into the humidor area where they store all the cigars. You cannot smoke in there. It's temperature controlled, but they let me go in and rearrange everything in order to get a photograph. So I had this ashtray. Can you see? I know it's a little dark in here. There's this big long marble ashtray. I had gone into bedrock granite. Are you everybody familiar with that? Mm-hmm. And I asked the guy, I said, do you have an ashtray that marble, granite, I don't care what it's made from? And he walked over to a shelf and he said, oh, you mean like this one? I said, yeah, how can I borrow that for a photograph for my book cover? He said, oh, you can just keep it. So it still rides around in the back of my car. But anyway, so then we placed a cigar in there. But for the cover, my publisher had to add the smoke because you can't smoke in there. And she added the red tip on the cigar. And she always pulls something out of the photograph, which I think is really kind of cool. So in this one, it's the ashtray. In the Uninvited Guest, it was the luggage. And I'll give you another story about this cover. I wanted to have the picture of the old library, and that's the entrance to that old library. And I wanted to have a female walking up the steps. And neither me or my publisher could find any pictures online that were right. So I called my stepdaughter, Megan, and I said, Megan, would you like to be on my cover? And she said, yeah, okay. So her and her boyfriend Bob, who's an amateur photographer, and I tramped down to the old library one Saturday, and we tried not to back into the traffic on 140, because you know there's some steps, and then the sidewalk, and then 140. And we said to Megan, okay, now put the luggage over here, put it over there, look up that way. And we finally got the photograph that we used here. So the thing that is stuck out here is the luggage. And Megan has complained. She said, well, I'm not as old as the character I represent. That is supposed to be the uninvited guest, Henrietta Wickham. And I said, yeah, I know, Megan, but I describe Henrietta just this way when she comes onto the page. She retained her girlish figure. Her hair is flowing down her back. And my publisher put the hat on her head to make her appear a little bit older. So that was that cover. And then this story, this is Bed, Breakfast, and Blackmail. That is a photograph of the Blackington Inn in Attleboro. I was driving by one day, we had just had a snowstorm, and I stopped and I backtracked and I parked and I walked over, and that's a perfect photograph for this. It takes place at Christmas time during the Garden Club Christmas party, and of course someone falls down the back stairs and dies, and so Gwen gets pulled into the investigation. This had a very interesting a double whammy, I guess you would call it, because the family in the story has owned this home for many, many centuries. And 100 years before, one of the sisters had fallen down the stairs. And she is actually a ghost in this book. And I have Parker, Gwen's husband, I have him follow her across the village green and go into the bed and breakfast and go find the ghost. And they solved actually the 100-year-old mystery at the same time. So that was really a cool story to work on. And then we have Wedding Interrupted. This moves to the summer. This is the fall, and this is the spring, of course, then Christmas time, and then we move to summer. Wedding Interrupted. This is the only photograph that I did not provide because we could not take it. On my back deck, which you guys are familiar with, I had the trellis and we had the beautiful clematis blooming at the time, but we couldn't get the right photograph because the big old maple tree was in the way. It's in the middle of the deck. So Stephanie, my publisher, found this photograph. I actually think it worked better because it has an empty podium in the middle. which goes very well with the story and the title, Wedding Interrupted. And she pulled out the wedding this way to go outside, the oval. And then this is the one that was just published last week. I picked up my printed copies, which I brought here. This happens to be my proof copy. If you can see all the bent over pages, that's something that needed to be fixed. And we edited and edited and edited again. And I couldn't believe all the things that we missed. It was just shocking. So when you're reading a story and you find a bloop, you got to know they tried really hard to find all of those things. But this takes place on Nantucket. I took Gwen out of Harbor Falls over to Nantucket. She and her sister ride the ferry, and they're attending a Halloween party. And of course, something goes very, very wrong. And Gwen is again pulled into her behind-the-scenes sleuthing to figure out what happened. And something that you would not know unless I told you, you probably can't see it because it's kind of dark in here. The background, you can see it has a texture. That is my publisher, Stephanie, took a photograph of her hydrangea blossoms. And she just changes the color for each of the books, which I think is just so cool. And then the one on the end here is a standalone. It has nothing to do with Gwen. I published this one 2 years ago. That is a photograph taken at Borderlands State Park, if anyone is familiar with that. Borderlands State Park in Easton. And if you walk in and you go down to the Ames mansion, then you take a left and you walk down the dirt road and you pass the lake on your left, and if you keep going, there's the old farmhouse. Well, this is taken from the farmhouse backwards. And Vinny was with me. It was a cloudy day, and we waited until we had shadows on the fence to get the picture. And what she added for this was wine glasses. It's not really pulled from the photograph, but she added wine glasses because this takes place in Delaware. This story is about a young woman who's in Boston, and she has been dating her boss, and they break up, and he's not happy with her. He starts harassing her. So she decides she is going to hightail it down to Delaware, where she was born. Does it sound familiar? I'm from Delaware. And she's going to attend her 20-year anniversary. I mean, not anniversary, 20-year high school reunion. And this is about what happens down there. And the title, The Life She Left Behind, is two ways. I mean, in the end, is she going to leave behind the Boston life, or is she going to leave behind the Delaware? And of course, there's some romance in here. I was told years ago that in a cozy mystery like this is, the only thing that cozy means is that your sleuth is just a normal person. Gwen is just a retired music professor. She's not a cop, she's not a FBI agent or anything. She's the lady down the road. They usually take place in a small town, so New England is perfect for that. And I was told there is no sex in a cozy mystery. I know, Dick, you prefer that kind.
I brought so much money to buy all these books.
There is romance, but there's no sex on the page. I mean, you can have off the page. And that also applies to any dead body. You never see it. You don't bump into it. You don't see the damage or why the person died. And I also like to have, this is not a Gwen story, but in the mystery series, I liked everybody to meet all the different characters that are involved, and one of them is going to get it. But I try to be very careful that the person who does get it is not very likable, and nobody misses this person. And there's no serial criminal here. It is crimes of passion. Last minute, just somebody gets so upset that they just can't control themselves anymore, and they do away with somebody with one weapon or another. So that is The Life She Left Behind. All right. Let's see, so I told you about picking names. One other thing that is very, very important for any author, for any genre of story, is to make sure that other people read it and give feedback. Writing groups are very, very important. They will see things that you have written that you will not see yourself, because you know that story inside and out. And one of the best examples, when I was taking this through the writing group, and I had a scene where Gwen was looking in the office at the college, and she saw a half-naked young man running out the other door. And Paula in my group says, "Well, Debbie, which half is naked?" And to me, I knew it was. I knew it was his shirt, but that is not what I wrote. So I would never notice that. The other thing is to make sure you read your story out loud. I wait till Vinny's golfing so he doesn't hear me talking to myself. But your ears will hear things much sooner than you will read it on your screen. Hello.
Excuse me, you said you had a card.
Oh, yes. Give you a, where did it, see this pile right here? Just take any one of them.
Okay, wonderful.
Okay, all right. She's from the book group down the hall. What was I talking about? Oh, the writing groups.
Naked men.
So to me, as the author, I knew it was his shirt, but it's not what I wrote. And it was an easy fix, and it usually is an easy fix. But another one that I wrote, and I don't recall which story it was in, but I had some news for one of the male characters. And it was a relief, a big relief to this guy. And I wrote, "His stiffness softened." And again, somebody in the writers group said, "Deb, I think you might want to change that." And I wrote something very vanilla, like he relaxed, his shoulders relaxed, or whatever I wrote. But I wrote it. I thought it was very poetic.
Now, who picked that up? Did Vinny pick that up?
Oh no, he's still trying to get through my second story. He's not a novel reader. He reads magazines, newspapers, but he just can't concentrate that long. So no, and it was fixed before he got a copy of the book anyway. But writers groups are very, very important for every author. In fact, I just had a meeting yesterday with a local author that was involved in a local author panel at the Norton Library last month. And he mentioned that he had been involved, he had been a journalist in the newspaper business. I said, aha, because now I'm working on Gwen's next story. And I want to bring back, let me see, which one was it? The cigar one. This guy put in a cigar bar right next to Gwen's best friend's bookstore. And the cigar smoke works its way into the bookstore, and all the inventory is tainted. And at the time, the bookstore owner, Liz, has arranged for a medium to come and do a speech. And she can't do it in the bookstore. Nobody wants to go in anymore because of the cigar smoke. So she asked Gwen if she would host the medium, and they decided to do a seance. Well, there are two characters from the newspaper that are in this story. Shirley, who's the reporter, and Annabelle, who's the photographer. And when I came to this, and I'm now writing my seventh story, I said, I want to bring back Shirley and Annabelle. They were really cool characters. So I'm trying to give Shirley kind of a background in the newspaper business, which is in flux. She's nearing retirement age. What is she going to do? Are they going to let her stay because she's old school, that kind of thing. So this newspaper guy yesterday at lunch gave me some very interesting ideas to incorporate into Shirley when I write the new story.
Debbie, when you do something like that, you bring back, how much of what's in that book about these two characters do you have to you have to reintroduce certain factors about that to make sense, or are you not trying to draw a connection?
You know, there's just a little nod to like where they met before. I haven't seen you for years, you know, kind of thing. And I have to know, how did I describe, you know, what's their hair color, you know, are they short, tall, fat, whatever, so that they are the same person when I bring them back. Yeah, that's the first time I have brought, well, now that I've gotten down the line, now I have the chance to bring back somebody, which is a fun thing to do. All right, let me see if there's anything else I want to share with you. Oh, one thing I do want to share is when I was growing up in Delaware, we lived out in the country, we had horses, just pleasure horses, nothing fancy. And there was the bookmobile that arrived every month down at the end of the country road. Did any of you have bookmobiles when you were younger? No? Okay. Well, we did. So my sister found this photograph of us on our horses down at the bookmobile. And it was just a cool thing. So I've always been a reader, but I never even thought about writing until I retired. It was scary. It was very scary. And my first attempt at writing The Uninvited Guest, my cousin down in DC said, well, it reads like a real estate brochure. So, because I had gotten so hung up on creating Harbor Falls and naming the streets and designing the old library into a home, it read like a real estate brochure. And that's when I started buying the how-to books and joining the Cape Cod Writers Center and going to seminars and things so I could learn how to write, because I did not know. I was so stupid. All right. Oh, and here's a picture of my girl cave with all my how-to books.
I love it.
Oh, I'll tell you, it has been a trip, I'll tell you. Have any of you written or published or want to, or? No? Okay. Well, I challenge you, especially to pick a name for a character. When you're driving around, look at street signs, go take a walk through a cemetery. That's a great source for names. And you can get some old names that maybe it's a family name. You can, you know, justify it in your story. And just go home and say, oh, that name talks to me. Go home and write a couple of paragraphs about that person. You don't have to go as far as I have gone. But it's a very fun thing to do. And it has filled my retirement hours when I retire. I mean, what do you do when you retire? You can golf in the summer. You can go out to lunch with your girlfriends. There's a variety of things you could do, but there are a lot of hours in the day, and I devote very few of them to cleaning. I mean, everything is straightened up, and it looks okay. It's neat. It's neat, but don't do that dusting thing. And one of the things that you learn when you're going through all these classes is how to actually write the story. You want to use strong words. You don't want to use what we call lazy words, especially verbs. Like, you don't want to say, oh, she walked into the room. No, she strolled, she hurried, she scurried. You know, how did she walk into the room? And same thing with said. They were telling new writers a few years ago that all you have to do for your dialogue tags is say he said, she said. And I thought, no, that's just too vanilla for me. So I want to know, how are they talking? She whispered. He shouted. You know, how are they talking? It really adds a lot to the dialogue to know that. All right. Thesaurus is your best friend when you are writing. If you run into one of these lazy words, you just throw it into the thesaurus. You do that? Yes. And it brings up all the options, right? Maybe not the first row, but you say, that's almost it. You click on that one, they come and they bring you some more words. And you finally find the one that says exactly what you want to say. You want to be clear. You want to be clear. And character arc is another thing. Gwen has to change. She changes within each story, and she has to change as you go through the series. She cannot be the same woman because everything that happens affects her and changes her the way she looks at life, maybe the way she treats people, you know, that type of thing. And I compare that to like Jessica Fletcher.
Yes.
Jessica never changed. She was always the same. And I think that was a feature of maybe doing a TV show, that she had to be consistent. But when you're writing a mystery series, it is important to have your character either grow or shrink. I like to have my characters grow. I like the positivity about that.
With Murder, She Wrote, they were constantly bringing in aspects of someone she knew 20 years ago, 50 years ago. They kept coming in and out, but she was the constant all the way through.
Right, exactly, exactly. And you know, you really don't want to hang around with Jessica or Gwen, because somebody's going to die. And consulting local experts is also an interesting part of writing mysteries. In each of the stories, I got in touch with a particular local expert that had expertise in what I was writing about. Like for the Uninvited Guest, because Gwen is actually involved with the music competition, I went to Wheaton College and I talked to one of the music professors there. And she is the one who told me that Gwen has got to have a baby grand in her home studio. So when you're reading this and she's giving lessons to the kids, she's got a baby grand right there. And I looked up my old flute teacher from 30 years ago, and she gave me the titles of the compositions that Gwen's flute student was going to play in the music competition. So that was fun. And of course, when I did Where There's Smoke, There's Trouble, I was chatting with the people at that cigar shop over in Raynham to get some ideas of things to incorporate. Bed, Breakfast, and Blackmail, that was about the two ghosts, and I connected, actually a friend of mine belongs with the ghost hunters in Rhode Island, and she gave me some very interesting experiences that she had experienced. One of them was she was down in Barnstable. She used to do tours of the older homes, and she was waiting. It wasn't quite time for the tour to begin, and she was waiting for people to arrive, and she looked in her mirror and there was a man standing at the back of her car, and he was dressed in old-fashioned dress, and she turned around and there was nobody there. And then when she left later that day, she saw him like across the street, and then he faded. You know, so I mean, these things happen. I have never met a ghost. I included the ghost in these stories just because I'm fascinated by the whole idea. If anybody ever tapped me on the shoulder, I don't know what I would do. And actually, my Marilyn lives in a haunted house. She's around the corner from me, and she tells all kinds of stories about them. So they do exist, and I don't know if I'm going to be a ghost or not. Who knows? Vinny and I have an agreement. We don't know which one of us is going to go first, but I said, well, if you go first, come back and sit on the swing in the backyard, and if there's no wind and the swing is moving, I'll know it's you. Because, I mean, really, I mean, who of us knows what happens, really? I mean, it's all guesswork, basically.
You made that whole series, Ghost Whisperer, on that.
Yeah.
Similar principle.
Yeah, in fact, that's another.
I know what would happen to you if somebody tapped you on the shoulder and you turned pale as a ghost. Absolutely.
Very good. Well, here's another how-to book, The Plot Whisperer.
Ooh.
All right, not the Ghost Whisperer, but The Plot Whisperer. Again, pitfalls to avoid. All right. So with all of my local experts, I give them an autographed copy of the book when it's published. And their name, they're acknowledged in there. They see their name in print. They like that. All right. And every author should read and read and read, listen to audiobooks, go to the movies. And you're listening for things and watching and reading things you really like about what the author did and things you really don't care for, like the he said, she said. I try to avoid that at all costs because it's just so awful. I was listening to a story one time, and the author, and the story was okay. I was getting through the story, but when she got to the dialogue, It was like dialogue, dialogue, he said. Dialogue, she said. Dialogue, he said. And it just went on, and it just drove me nuts. I could not finish the story. I returned the audiobook to the library. So you need not to bore your readers. And that is what authors do. We do everything for the readers. We want to make you happy when you read our stories. And we don't want you to put the book down and never return to it. So we need to keep you involved and interested in what's going on. All right. And actually, I think that is about all I have to share with you this evening. What I do want to do is read just a short passage from The Uninvited Guest. I've told you a little bit about the story and the characters, and this will give you an idea of the writing. Okay. The hands on the clock dragged as Gwen waited for the judge's arrival. Not one to waste time, she returned to her flower beds, removed spent blooms, yanked weeds, and scattered fragrant cedar mulch. Bringing the gardens back to life after 2 years of neglect had taken more effort than she'd estimated. Of course, without Parker working beside her, every chore took more than twice as long. Lack of light here. For all of May, June, July, and August, she planted, fertilized, mowed, weeded, trimmed, and mulched. Each day, the flowers and bushes rewarded her with new sprigs of emerging buds, easing Gwen's ache for Parker. Mother Nature, the best grief counselor. The rumble of an engine echoed from the western side of the old library. No doubt the judge, Gwen grumbled, this should be interesting. She stepped from a patch of Shasta daisies, crossed the back lawn, and bypassed the small-scale fish pond, stopping at the top of the driveway. A sleek black sedan with Vermont plates came to a stop. The driver's door on the other side flew open, and a tall woman emerged. She rested her forearms on the car's shiny rooftop and gazed across at Gwen. The eyes were hidden behind huge sunglasses, but the smirk was all too familiar. Gwen's mouth gaped open. It couldn't be her, please no, anyone but her. Henrietta had arrived. All right. All right, so are there any questions? You've asked a few as we went along. Any others?
How long does it take you typically, or are they all different based upon your storyline?
This storyline dictates a lot of it. Because I was learning how to write when I first started The Uninvited Guest, it took me 4 years to get this to a publisher.
Okay.
The next one was 2 years. This was a year and a year and a year. And then the standalone was about a year. No, I take that back. This one that happened in Nantucket took me 2 years. I was really nervous about it being in a real place. Harbor Falls is fictional. I can do anything I want in Harbor Falls. But in a real place, you have to be accurate about where things are and the distances between them and all that. You can only do so much with internet research. And I remember the day I found out that Wikipedia is not necessarily accurate. And I said, no. But anybody can go onto Wikipedia and add their 2 cents to the topic, whatever it is. So if you're doing something in a real place, you really should visit it. And Nancy, last year when she found out I was doing this, and said, come on, Deb, let's go. All right, so Nancy and I hopped on the ferry, went over to Nantucket, stayed for 3 days, explored all the different areas, and got a real feel for the island of Nantucket. So it's very important to do that. In fact, when I was writing The Uninvited Guest, the music shop, I like to convert buildings. It's in a converted grist mill, and it has a working water wheel. So I wanted to know, I'm not given a big dissertation in the book about how a water wheel works, but I went down to Plymouth and I visited the Jenny grist mill. It's now the Plymouth something or other grist mill. Because I just wanted to see, well, does the water go in under? Does it go over? What happens after? Where does it come from? And it's just when I mentioned the water wheel, it's accurate. So that's an important part of your research as well. Is there anything else? No?
How
Okay.
did you find your publisher or support?
I met her at the Cape Cod Writers Center. They did a workshop one Saturday morning. She's an independent publisher, so it's not self-publishing, and it's not one of the big ones.
Okay.
She's in between. I pay her for her services. She does all the formatting, the editing. She's an English professor. And she puts it up on Amazon after and arranges for my printed copies with the local printer. She does all of that. It's Riverhaven Books in Whitman. And she has printed all of these. And these days, none of even the big publishing houses don't help authors with their marketing. You have to do it yourself. And as well as me, I do all my marketing myself. Trying to find retirement villages and senior centers who are looking for speakers. And I go and I do a talk similar to this. So you do your own marketing too. Alrighty. Well, if there's nothing else, I do have copies of all the books if you would like an autographed copy. They're all $12.95. So if you want a copy, just let me know. I'll be here for a few more minutes.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.